I've introduced myself a bunch of times in the last couple of days, including that I've been 40 years in the media business. 20 of those, I'm proud to clarify, I've been involved with U.S. international broadcasting. 10 years at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in various capacities, including heading all the editorial operations and also serving as acting president. And then 10 years at the Broadcasting Board of Governors, now renamed the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And throughout these years, I worked shoulder to shoulder with colleagues at the Voice of America, including some of those on the panel here today, and gained enormous respect and admiration for their professionalism and their dedication, as well as, and perhaps most of all, by their personal histories, their narratives, the things that have brought them in their lives, most of them natives of the countries to which they broadcast, the things that have brought them to where they are today. So in this session, we'll go along with 4 Voice of America journalists right down into the middle of the chaos of the contemporary media space that really is the central focus of this conference. These journalists walk the walk every single day to create fact-based, high-quality journalism and other information and get that to audiences in some of the most challenging media environments in the world. Just a couple of sentences of context about freedom and media freedom in the world today to appreciate the environment in which Voice of America is operating. According to Freedom House, in its recently released annual Freedom in the World report, global freedom declined for the 17th consecutive year in 2022. Actually, beyond this grim headline, there are some hints of good news. The gap between the number of countries that registered overall improvements and those that registered declines was the narrowest it's been during this 17 years of global deterioration. In fact, some countries even made improvements, mostly because of more competitive elections and a rollback of some of the pandemic-related restrictions. On media freedom, over these 17 years, the number of countries and territories that receive a score of 0 out of 4 in the Freedom House report's Media Freedom Indicator jumped from 14 to 33 as journalists face persistent attacks from autocrats and their supporters while receiving inadequate protection from intimidation and violence, even in some democracies. And media freedom in the 180 countries assessed is under pressure in 157 of those countries. And we can do a really quick visual of that gets to the places represented by the journalists who are here today. If we could kick over to my screen, if you don't mind. This is the Reporters Without Borders, RSF's annual assessment of media freedom around the world. The countries that are in deep red are the countries where there is the least media freedom. So if you take a look at the scale, out of 180 countries, here you see Russia at 155th, Iran at 166, Afghanistan 156. Where was it? There was Saudi Arabia. Where was there? There's Iraq. Where's Iran? There's Iran. 178, sorry. Afghanistan 156, Pakistan 157, China 175, and on around this region. Ukraine, a little bit better shape, 106, although it's actually declined somewhat from 2021. So just a quick look at this part of the world that we'll be talking about now with these journalists. So what we're going to do is introduce each of them in turn, alphabetical order, and ask for just a several sentence overview, a quick overview from them about the area of the world or countries for which they're responsible, the focus of their programming, and to quickly cite, really just list the greatest challenges that they face in reporting and getting content to audiences in these markets. And after we do this introduction and round robin, we'll come back and probe down more deeply into the elements of each of the areas. So in alphabetical order, in fairness, I'm happy to start with Chen, a native of China, veteran journalist and television host, Mandarin managing editor for Voice of America. Shin's been reporting on China and China-related issues for VOA since 1997. Her weekly talk show, Pro and Con, has been a very popular Mandarin program since it launched in 2001. Shin, tell us about your work in China.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for having me here.
Are you on?
Okay. All right. Our target area is obviously China, and then Taiwan, Hong Kong, and also the 50 million overseas Chinese. So it's a very large market. Talking about the challenges we're facing, there are so many, but mainly three things. One is a deteriorating press condition in China and Hong Kong. And this comes both ways. One is that it becomes almost impossible to do on-the-ground coverage about China because foreign media are largely kept out of China. And also because of China's tightening control, it's increasingly difficult for our audience to reach outside content outside of China. So that's number one. A second challenge is China's really over the past few decades, especially the past decade, has put in huge amount of resource in so-called telling China's story better. So in addition to the state media, they also put huge amount of money in funding globally Chinese media like TV stations, local newspapers. It's a very saturated effort. And also on social media, they have launched an incredible large-scale campaign of largely disinformation. So very, very just large scale and just like tsunami of information from China. So that's number two. Third, Chinese media landscape has become increasingly crowded and fragmented. So in addition to the traditional players like BBC or Deutsche Welle, Voice of America, we're also seeing all the major news outlets nowadays are having Chinese versions. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Reuters, AFP, Financial Times, you can go on and on and on. So it's like really competitive, and also in addition to that, Chinese state-funded effort, Chinese media, and then also private enterprises with their own agenda, like the Falun Gong media group. So it's like becoming very crowded. So,
got it. Excellent.
That's
Thanks.
Other challenges.
Myroslava Gongadze is a veteran broadcaster and award-winning journalist, currently Eastern Europe chief at Voice of America. From 2015 to 2022, she was chief of the Ukrainian service. She joined the service originally in 2004, serving as a reporter and anchor. As well as her work for VOA, she periodically contributes to NPR. She was a moderator of Ukraine's nationally televised post-Maidan election debates in 2014, chosen largely because of her reputation for fairness and the respect everyone has for her journalism in Ukraine as an even-handed moderator for that particular set of events. Myroslava.
Thank you. Interesting, because the challenge that that we face in Ukraine is very clear to the world, right? Ukraine has war on its territory. However, I would like to emphasize that Ukraine, as you showed on the map, looked as a bright spot in comparison to other countries. And I think that VOA work in that region contributed to the fact that Ukraine had a vibrant, and still have a vibrant civil society and vibrant media landscape. So for us, it was not difficult for VOA to work in Ukraine. We were able to establish partnerships with many media outlets in Ukraine, and it's not the problem of access to the market, But what we bring to the market is the a model of media, how to cover the story, how to properly investigate, how to tell the story to the press, because that's what Ukrainian media is still unfortunately lacking. I was running Ukrainian service for many years, but right now, with the war on Ukraine territories in Eastern Europe, I went back to the field. And what I feel is very important in the region, that the world, right now my audience is the world audience, not exactly Ukrainian audience as it was before. What I feel that the world is lacking information about that part of the world. We talked in this hall a lot about perception and wrong perception and misunderstanding, specifically misunderstanding about big country of that region as is Russia. And I feel this is very important to tell the story about Eastern Europe to the world today. That part of the world is not enough seen and has a lot of power will have a lot of power in the future.
Do you want to leave it at that? Because I'm going to come back and probe
Yes.
that a bit, and particularly because I think your current role gives an opportunity to talk about a unique added value of Voice of America to what other media outlets can offer about what's happening there. So I'm going to probe you a bit more about that. But let's shift over to Leili Soltani. Leili, born in Tehran, Iran, is director of VOA's Persian language broadcasts, an award-winning television journalist with more than 20 years of experience. Leili began her career at VOA's sister network under USAGM, Radio Farda, in Washington, D.C. as a broadcast journalist. Leili, tell us about your work.
Thank you, Jeff. Area of focus, Iran. Aside from trying to broadcast to one of the most repressing countries in terms of freedom challenges, you mentioned Freedom House and you mentioned Reporters Without Borders. Iran has always managed to rank at the bottom of both lists. You talked about Freedom House's report that some countries managed to actually improve their situation. Iran managed to decline. Now their ranking is right next to Cuba. In the Reporters Without Borders, 180 countries, Iran ranks right next to China. So Iranian government has the complete monopoly on radio and television, right? And actively tries to prevent any other free media around the world to broadcast inside Iran. We broadcast via satellite dishes, and also we have a 24-hour digital coverage. Satellites are banned in Iran. They are confiscated constantly. People are being fined, very high fine, $2,800, which is a lot of money for Iran. Like average income in Tehran might be about like 3 months of an income for a household. They block social media. And so we constantly have to find innovating ways to go around all of these challenges. So one of the most important challenges that we have is that we cannot have reporters inside the country. And for any media to have access to accurate news, like having actually fit inside the country is one of the most important issues. We do not have that. We are heavily relying on our citizen journalists, Iranians who are inside Iran, and they try to send information out. Now, Iranian government is actively trying to arrest those people. Like during the last round of protests in Iran, people who were sending videos outside Iran were arrested. They're being jailed. So that's one of the issues. And then media who actually might have some access to Iran are banned from sharing their content with us. Like if you see a Reuters or AP report on Iran on an issue, the first highlight that you see is like no use VOA Persian, right? So that's another challenge. Last but not least is the harassment of our journalists. I mean, we do not have anybody inside Iran, but we try to get as close as possible to the target area. So our reporters in Erbil, Iraq, or in Turkey are constantly being harassed by the Iranian government. Just one quick example, and I'm going to finish. My reporter in Erbil just very recently, his brother was captured by IRGC and was threatened that if he continues his work with Voice of America, they are basically he's never gonna see his brother. So just a quick overview of challenges.
No, I'm gonna break the order of battle here for just a second to make sure everyone clearly understood something you said that when I first found out about it was shocking to me, and that is you are not allowed to use the content of major Western media outlets by their own. They have done this in order to be able to continue to operate in Iran. You explicitly are not allowed to use their content. I frankly, when I first heard that a number of years ago, I was shocked by that. I wanted just to highlight that so everyone can appreciate that. Reuters and Associated Press? Yes. Anybody else you want to point the finger at?
Any major news agency who gets to do anything on Iran, their first condition of the government is do not share content with Voice of America. So basically, like, we're used to it. Like anybody that goes to Iran, even though we have contracts with AP, with Reuters, we use all of their material except the ones on Iran.
Do you have the same thing, Ayesha? Ayesha, Tanzeem, you have a little different thing. You have a big area for which you're responsible. So you're going to jump in and talk about it a bit more differently. Ayesha Tanzeem's director of VOA's South and Central Asia Division. Prior to the November 2021 appointment, she was chief of Voice of America's Afghanistan and Pakistan Bureau based in Islamabad, Pakistan. One of a few foreign correspondents that traveled to areas under control and influence of the Islamic State militant group when it was at its peak of power in 2015. Tell us about your area.
Thank you for having me. So yes, South and Central Asia, so 8 different language services, but then it also includes the Turkish service, so Turkey, and the Kurdish service, which has areas of Iraq and Iran and Syria. So the challenges in each of these countries are different. So for example, in 3 countries, Pakistan, Turkey, and now Afghanistan, our websites are blocked. In Afghanistan, our television and radio stations were banned last year off of the local, we used to have affiliates and our TV shows used to air on local channels in Afghanistan. That was banned. And then we had like 15 FM stations and multiple AM stations in Afghanistan. That was banned. And now we anticipated all of these moves when the Taliban came over. So we were prepared for it. And we now have a 24/7 satellite channel going into Afghanistan, and we do shortwave and medium wave from outside the country. But then, for example, in Turkey, our journalists are facing this additional challenge of the government wanted us to register locally and have a local person that they could arrest or hold responsible anytime they didn't like something we did, and we refused to do that. And so our journalists now don't have credentials, which leads to a different set of problems. One of our journalists who did a story after the earthquake, for example, and highlighted how the Kurdish population in Turkey was feeling discriminated against and was complaining about not receiving aid after the earthquake. We got a call literally from the president's office saying that he doesn't have credentials and he can get arrested. So the challenges are different. In each country, we have a different challenge. And my biggest challenge is to try to keep my journalists safe. In these different environments, we are constantly moving journalists in and out of spaces, out of the country, back into the country. I'm facing some of the same challenges that Leili's facing in several countries, like in Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, in Iran. We don't have journalists in the country because it's too dangerous to have journalists in the country. They will get arrested. And so we are placing journalists around, or people are going in and out quietly to gather information, or using citizen journalists, or just using various kinds of ways to collect information. So, for example, in Afghanistan, we evacuated most of our journalists after the Taliban takeover, but we now have radio shows that people can call in. So people call in and talk to us about their problems. And so we have to work around these various, roadblocks that these various regimes put in our path.
So let me come back at those of you whose countries are closed to your journalists, and you can't have people dedicated necessarily reporting for you. In my time, at least, we always put a premium, not necessarily on being first, but being accurate. Very careful about checking our information, partly because we appreciated that people took our broadcast very seriously, and maybe they'd hear a breaking story, but to make sure that story was accurate, I'm going to wait and maybe check in and see what Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, or Voice of America has to say about this story. So, and this applies to the three of you explicitly, what do you do, what can you do to try to verify accuracy of reports that you get from individuals, even in call-in shows? Somebody calls up and says something happened. Is that person just on the air, or are you trying to take steps? What can you possibly do to try to verify the accuracy of this information in order to be able to report? Who wants to start?
Sure, I'll go first. So the same things that all journalists do, which is have multiple sources. So when even in live call-in shows, our anchors are experienced journalists who have a fairly good idea of the situation on the ground and know when to challenge somebody who's saying something that seems particularly, out of the ordinary. So, which is the job of any journalist, in any live show, anywhere in the world. People who come on your show, if you have to have a fairly good idea of what they're going to say and how you're going to balance it if it needs balancing. Yes, we have multiple sources, some of them on the record, some of them off the record. We talk to a lot of people who don't want to be named. We call our sources constantly. There are a lot of people who say, don't use our name, don't use our information, but we are just telling you. People send us WhatsApp messages. People send us, messages on Facebook and, other ways of, telling us this is going on. So for a pre-recorded or published story, you go through all of those methods. For live on-air programming, even before you go live, you have to have a fairly good idea of what the situation on the ground is, so that you're not caught in a situation where people are calling in and just making random claims. And if somebody does, your journalists have to know how to handle it. Mm-hmm. So a lot of training goes into how people handle these kinds of situations.
What you got, Leili? What would you like to add?
So in addition to what Ayesha mentioned, especially on the live shows, we have fact checkers who have been trained to check facts while the program is on the air, to make sure that if some unverified claim is being mentioned, they check immediately, and then they're constantly they're in communication with the host. And also in VOA Persian's unique situation, especially in coverage of the anti-government protest, which we have to heavily rely on user-generated content, we actually trained our audience on how to send verifiable content to us. Basically, we've asked them to, if you're sending us a video, please try to mention the name, the date, the name of the street you're in, and the time of the day. So there are different ways for us to verify these contents, and one of them is basically to train the people who we rely on to provide us with the accurate content, because accuracy is on top of our list, has always been.
China is a complicated place because it is drowning in information. There's so much information available to a consumer of news or information in China, but it creates an incredibly complex environment for you to try to piece together what's real and what isn't. How do you do it?
Well, in addition to what Leili and Ayesha were saying, we also, I think, because Voice of America has such a long history and tradition in China and is widely respected, people listen to VOA and BBC as a very reliable source. So I think people come to us with information a lot of times. And also China, VOA was in China reporting until 2018, until the Chinese government stopped granting us visas. But before then, I think we had kind of established some kind of network of activists, nonprofit groups, or influencers who had that close relationship with VOA. So we're still taking advantage of that. Whenever there is something going on, they call us, they share information. We do the due diligence, but I think that has been invaluable channels for us too. And also the overseas Chinese, is also a very large community, and there is a lot of information sharing, including activist groups or human rights groups. We also work with them to get China content. Yeah.
Can
Go ahead.
Add something? We talked about our limitations, but I also want to talk about VOA's unique opportunity, and you see this. Iran story, for example, in my basically case, is not only Iran story, is Iran, China, Iran, Venezuela, Iran, Russia, Iran, Afghanistan. And I have a vast opportunity when something comes, when a news comes that I need to verify. I have Ayesha, I have Myroslava in case of like Iran, Russia, Iran, Ukraine, and then I have the China branch. So this actually enables us to verify news in respect with our own target audience, but when it comes to the other parts of the world, and even it's a strength that Voice of America has, and it's a uniqueness that I think we do have.
Myroslava, this comes back to you. You now are based in Eastern Europe, and you're providing coverage for Voice of America, as in more than 40 language services and English, including English, about what's happening in that region. So you're talking about leveraging your unique abilities as a Ukrainian and what the Ukrainian service can uniquely get out of that particular story. I mean, together, I don't want to cut short the other international broadcasters, the RFRL people and Deutsche Welle and the others who are doing a great job. But you can go in and get content uniquely as a Ukrainian about what's happening there. And then what happens to that? How does it work? So you do a report perhaps initially in Ukrainian, or you do English, or you do Russian? I mean, how's it work? What do you do?
Let me give an example for better understanding. Last week, President Zelensky came to Warsaw. And there's no one else basically from, VOA, even Radio Liberty doesn't have a correspondent in Warsaw. So I was uniquely able to basically cover this story for all VOA services, for all 40 over languages. And I went live 6 times in different languages, in Ukrainian, in Russian, in English to Africa, went on programs to English to Africa. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish, so that's a lack. But basically, 6 times I was speaking, telling the story about this visit for the audience in their languages. In addition, obviously, I covered the story in English that was translated in all these languages and went around the world. So this is the uniqueness that VOA has, that we can have a subject matter expert like I am, or as my colleagues are, and tell this and tell the story uniquely, specifically, very analytical and facts-based story to the world. VOA has fantastic fantastic audience in Africa, in Latin America, in Global South, that are lacking information about the war in Ukraine. So this is what we can provide to them, and that's why I'm there and why I'm doing what I do. And I go to Ukraine every 2 months for a couple of weeks and we have a rotation of correspondents in Ukraine. I personally went to Izum, Odessa, Chernihiv, Bucha, all these places after they were liberated, recorded many interviews with high-profile officials, with Ukrainian military. I have that access as well because they trust me, they know me well. They know that the story I will tell, that's the story, the factual story that the world need to know.
And that, again, that's all one way or another available to the other services of VOA to use in the way that's most appropriate for them. Did you want to add something, Leili?
Yes, she does not speak Farsi, but we have simultaneous translations, which we constantly use, and Myroslava comes on our air because, of course, Russia, Iran, Ukraine, and she's been on our air, and she's managed to actually secure the most high-profile guests for us, especially in case of the Ukrainian plane shot down by the Iranian IRGC. We had firsthand from an Ukrainian official, the National Security Advisor, on our program because of Myroslava coming and actually condemning the actions of the IRGC.
I would think as well that the Voice of America, and this was true certainly with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and its more surrogate mission of really trying to have resources out on the ground, that there are places, and Ayesha, I'm really thinking of you in this instance, where there is very little international media, where you very likely may have a journalist in place to cover a breaking, unanticipated story and be first on the scene at that story. I'm thinking of a place such as Uzbekistan, right, where you're in charge of the Uzbek service. Azerbaijan would be another example. You have the expertise about a place where there are international journalisms not on the ground, so you might have opportunities to be first on those stories. Bangladesh would be another.
We are often first on the stories, even for ordinary, I shouldn't call it ordinary, but I cover a part of the world where explosions are ordinary, unfortunately, and violence is ordinary, unfortunately. But because we have these native language speaking journalists working for Voice of America in most of these places, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, they are often the first ones on the scene. So among the international media, we are often breaking the story, and it appears later in like English language and other international media, and that is very common. And also because we have over the years developed sources, so people know to contact us when something happens. They know we have WhatsApp numbers where it's free for people to send us messages. So we have developed sources over the years among our audience, among the officials in that country, but also among the activist groups and the human rights community. And they know to reach out to us when they see something happening.
Let's talk about the scourge of disinformation and what you all do to counter and combat disinformation in your broadcasts. So I think it was just last week or week before, I'm already losing track of time, that representing the U.S. at the Democracy Summit sessions that were held in the Netherlands, CEO Amanda Bennett was asked about disinformation and what U.S. international broadcasting does to combat it. And her answer was, we flood the zone with good journalism. That's the best antidote to disinformation, is the way Amanda put it. But can you cite examples of disinformation that have come up where you've been able, through your resources and research, to push back and try to set the record straight and catch disinformation?
Can I just
jump on that?
Yeah, I just want to jump on Amanda's statement because that's what I would say we do in Ukraine, let's say. As I mentioned before, during the couple of last years, we signed 52 contracts with local and national media in Ukraine. So basically, the fact that audience and media owners want VOA content on their TV channels, this way we actually flooding the media space with the credible information, with our coverage. So obviously, often we have to correct some things and tell the story about America majority of the time, but this is the way we do this in Ukraine. I know the other situations, other countries.
Jump in.
So I think almost everything we do is to help combat misinformation and disinformation. Iranians are bombarded by their government and the government-owned media with disinformation and misinformation. I would like to look at my notes quickly. I want to be accurate, quoting Ayatollah Khamenei. When coronavirus pandemic happened, actually Ayatollah Khamenei announced that coronavirus had been specifically built for Iran by the United States government using the genetic data of Iranians. Khamenei refused American assistance to fight the virus, claiming that American vaccines American vaccines could be a way for U.S. to actually use the virus more. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Khamenei again immediately put the blame on NATO and especially on the United States, announcing that, quote, the U.S. actually started the war in Ukraine. The U.S. created the grounds for this war to expand NATO in the East. And so basically, we constantly use verified sources, experts, reporting to combat this misinformation and disinformation. We also have 2 specific programs which are designed to verify the misinformation coming from Iran. One of them is Last Page, is one of our most watched programs after our news program. And also there's another show we just introduced, Decode. One thing that we did, like for example, recently was trying to combat the misinformation that came from the government regarding the poisoning of the Iranian schoolgirls in Iran, which they tried to wash down. And we know almost 13,000 school kids have been poisoned in Iran. And it's like 300 schools have been affected. So, like I said, almost everything we do is to combat misinformation.
Chen?
Okay, to be honest, disinformation from China is so prevalent and so global and so large scale, I don't even know where to start. But I think there are 3 levels of disinformation we're fighting, basically, as VOA, addressing VOA Mandarin. One is just fact-based, right? Like straight-out lies. I want to tell a story that just shows how ridiculous disinformation from China can be. On February 15th, there was a marginalized radio show host in Washington, D.C. He tweeted a political joke, saying that the White House insider told him that Biden has a plan to destroy Taiwan. Okay, this is a joke that meant to criticize Biden's Taiwan policy. And then this tweet was picked up by a pro-China commentator in Taiwan, and he reposted it on Weibo, which is China's Twitter-like platform. And then that was picked up by the Chinese state media. And within a day, there were 140 million people read that news. And then within 2 days, Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson demanded that the U.S. to explain its plan to destroy Taiwan. So you can see just like there are so many different layers of it, but basically what it comes down to is China state media grabbed onto this kind of conspiracy theory and made it also like a official statement, and one in U.S. And then even after the U.S. State Department disputed it and said we didn't have a plan to destroy Taiwan, the foreign ministry officials still reposted all these tweets. So this is a kind of information we address in a program called Mandarin Polygraph, where we just basically dispute straight out lies. So that's the first level, right? Like total facts, and we did a backgrounder on this radio host and how it was picked, how it became such a big story in China. Millions, hundreds of millions of people read that story. So that's the first level. And the second level, I think there are a lot of thematic disinformation. For example, the origin of the COVID virus. That's a big story that the Chinese government has put a huge amount of resource peddling. And in fact, I think just a year ago, the German fund, German Marshall Fund, they did a research and finding that on social media platforms, when you do like COVID origin, Chinese state media's conspiracy theories, including like a U.S. military lab, Fort Detrick. That was a big story that that was originated from the Chinese military lab. That kind of thematic things that we also address constantly by interviewing top experts and officials, intelligence workers, basically investigative stories to address that kind of thematic disinformation. And then, of course, there are some bigger narratives from China, like, the West is declining and the East is rising, that kind of narrative. We also, do a lot of, but it's just, as Leili said, it's everything you do is fighting disinformation, but there are different layers, that we do.
Ayesha, jump in.
Yeah. Yes, I just want to jump in and say some of it has to do with the trust that we've built among our audience after decades and decades and decades of good journalism and showing that we do pay attention to fact-checking and we do make sure that we are always accurate. And just an example of that is in Afghanistan, while the Taliban have banned our television and radio, but we still broadcast and we have a 24/7 channel now in Dari and Pashto, Taliban officials still appear on our channel to answer questions. We are probably, and other international broadcasters, RFERL and BBC, etc., but local media cannot hold them accountable because any critical story, you get a call from like some official or sometimes even the intelligence agency if you do a critical story. So our anchors sitting in Washington ask the hard questions. But it goes to show that they know that people are listening to us and watching us. And the last time there was like a study of, Afghans, like our trust was like 94%. People trusted what we said. And it speaks to it that Taliban officials feel obliged to appear on our programs if they want Afghans to listen to them.
Well, let me take a little detour there because and in some respects, this is more of a question for the agency, more of a Kate Nieper question than a VOA question. But if someone were to ask you, and Kate may feel she needs to jump in, if someone were to ask you, and I want to come ask you, this is not something I asked you to prepare about, but a little bit about how you talk about America to the rest of the world. But if someone says to you, why in the world should U.S. taxpayer money go to support putting the Taliban on the air? What's the matter with you? Why would you do something like that? Is that really a good expense of taxpayer money? And I ask you this, having been asked this many times by people on Capitol Hill. What's your answer?
It is absolutely a good use of U.S. taxpayers' money, which includes my money, of course, as well. For the same reason that all the things that we've talked about in the 3 days of this conference, how do you have credibility if you do not present all sides of the story? Do you want to be Russia TV or China TV? Do you want people to say, these guys do propaganda, they don't do real journalism? You lose credibility if you do not present all sides of the story. And also, I would argue that there's nothing better than hearing from the Taliban when they ban girls from going to school, etc. And they come on air and say that, a discerning public, and most of our audience are, they can listen to it and they can understand the silliness of the Taliban policy when it comes straight from the Taliban. When an anchor asks them, why do you ban girls from going to school in a country where schools are already segregated? So your argument about parda is not logical. So I'll tell you one example, again, from our Afghan service. We put the Taliban spokesman and a former female MP, very strong woman, who challenged the Talib on every point. So you had the Talib presence, but you had somebody very strong, female, with vast knowledge of Islam, challenging him every step of the way. And so the audience can see it.
This gets to an important element of how critical the professionalism of your moderators is. In the times, and there certainly have been times, when U.S. international broadcasting has messed up, and I had to answer for some of those myself, it often is through sloppy moderation, essentially giving the bad guys an open microphone and letting them say whatever the heck they want to say. That's no good. So clearly you have to maintain the very highest levels of professionalism to moderate, rein that in, challenge the guests, and push back on that. You've certainly had examples of that, I would think, Myroslava, and your work. All of you, I'm sure, have had that example in your work. But I did want to make the distinction that the moderation and the walling off of those kinds of comments is crucially important. Impact. I'm curious as to ways that you know that you are making a difference in reaching your audiences. And I've teed up a couple of examples that you've given me here. I know from experience that USAGM has an extremely rich, well thought through impact model that looks at, Kate, I think more than 24 maybe kind of variables at ways that you're having impact in order, when that valid question is asked by your funders and others, how do you know you're making a difference? You can answer those questions. And Leili, I'll start with you because I have one teed up here.
Sure.
If I can go back to
This
my
was not even
screen, please.
among my list, but yeah, it's clear show of impact. So the Office of Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei released a poster warning a population about the need of maintaining security in Iran. In that poster, you see that Voice of America's symbol is considered one of the main threats to Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran's security. The blade of knife, which is Voice of America, has stopped by the shield of the Iran's security. The text, let me read it to you, says, without security, you cannot sleep comfortably at night at your home. And I think if Iran's supreme leader finds it necessary to post on Instagram Voice of America as a threat, then we've done our job.
Chen, let me go back to you. Thanks a lot for that. Very difficult to assess impact of programming in China because of challenges in trying to measure audiences and understand. But one way, well, tell me, let me put your example up and you tell me what it is here, okay? One sec.
Okay, so this is basically a social media platform in China called Weibo. It's like a Twitter-like platform in China. And the photo there is actually from screenshots from a video, a social media video we posted of Alaska Senator Sullivan giving a speech on the Senate floor, talking about the U.S. should push for taking away China's developing country label. Why is this important? It's because China is designated as developing countries, which gives China a lot of preferential treatment in multilateral international agencies. So I think there is this push, and Sullivan was one of the first person to push this. And by the way, in fact, just about a week ago, the House passed a bill called PRC is not a developing country. So one of the mission, I think, for our programming is to facilitate conversations, right, discussions about U.S.-China relations or U.S. policies. And this is one example. You would think it's a very dry topic, but once we put this social media video on our Twitter account, we got so much, reactions and tons of comments from our viewers. And also this video was widely circulated in China. I think it was able to do that because it's not a strictly political topic, so it kind of went under the radar of the Chinese censors. But so we found just numerous social media platforms, blogs, they use this video or just break into little bits like this, screenshots, and every shot has a Chinese subtitle of what he was saying. And people have so many comments on it, and I think it's just a great discussion that we try to encourage, in the U.S.-China relations. This is a great example. And also, I think talking about difficulty of doing, what kind of impact. I think because of the digital media, I think the analytics tell us a lot, and we have seen tremendous increase of our viewership, like our Twitter, for example, or our YouTube. We're seeing 200, 400% of increase of views just last year. So we know our impact is there, and we're just like hundreds of millions of views on our social media channels.
Yeah, what fascinates me here is that the kind of the what we used to call in the magazine business the pass-along effect, where you put out a piece of content and then people grab it and they pass it around in such a way that is more difficult for the authorities to block than it is to just block something called Voice of America. It's somebody who's essentially stolen your content. You're glad they've done so, and they're sharing it among their own networks and reaching audiences.
We're getting these kind of daily anecdotes of how Chinese people share this kind of VOA content, and a lot of times they have to chop it into little bits so that it's very difficult for the authority to censor. But we see this on WeChat, we see this on Weibo, and they get immediately eliminated, but people already shared it. So it's just prosperous digital environment. You cannot stop the flow of information.
Ayesha.
So because we're in a digital space, it is much easier to measure our impact when we get, let's say 1 million views on video or hundreds of millions of views over a year. We know that people are watching. And we know that people are, because you don't get 1 million views on a view if 1 million people did not watch. So it is much, much easier to measure impact in this digital age, and everything we do does go on our digital platforms in one form or the other. And it's made our lives that much easier because it just tells us very directly how many people are watching. Often the people that are watching are far higher than you see because of the reasons Chen mentioned, which is that people take it and then they share it. They share it on WhatsApp groups, they share it on WeChat, they share it among each other. So we know that if we are seeing 1 million views, the actual people who are watching it is far, far higher.
Myroslava, did you want to say something separate? Because I want to tee up that clip that you guys did too, but go ahead.
I'll start and then you will tee up the clip. I'm just talking about impact. I just want to go back a little bit to Ayesha points about the trust. What are the biggest problem we have in the media today? From my perspective, you always obviously have your own, but from my perspective, it's trust and credibility. That's what we have problem with. But we at VOA, I have to say, don't have that problem because now, let's say in Ukraine.
Get on your microphone. It's on, but keep.
Let's say in Ukraine, 9 of 10 Ukrainians say from the opinion poll, 9 of 10 Ukrainians say they trust VOA. So this is very important to maintain that credibility and that trust. And about impact, I came to VOA in 2004. And I came to basically do television. That's what I wanted to do before I worked for Radio Liberty for a little bit. And we started television broadcasting just as Ukraine were preparing for revolution. The first after independence revolution, Maidan, or Orange Revolution in 2004. And basically we started our broadcasting, daily broadcasting, that December, January, when people in Ukraine on Maidan, on the main square, protesting fraudulent election. And we were the first, VOA were the first, who spoke about US position and the fact that US is not recognizing fraudulent election. And there was no free press in Ukraine at that moment. There was only a couple of online publications, no TV stations, only one TV station, Channel 5, that gives Ukrainians more or less credible information. And we were there. They put the big screen on Maidan, and we were broadcasting on that screen daily for the people who were protesting on the street. The revolution was successful, and Ukraine had a new democratic government. So, is that impact? I think we had something to add to that success. Now, today, the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is a global story, and we are there on the ground to tell that story to the world, and then you can cue the.
I'll just give the first little bit of it here because it's an example of how this kind of hybrid reporting that you all can do at Voice of America, taking advantage of your different language services and your skills to produce pieces along the lines of this. We'll watch just the start of it.
We're a couple hundred miles outside of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and we're driving through an area that was clearly an active battle zone very shortly before we got here, and we understand that Russian forces are right behind us, not specifically chasing us, but heading towards Kyiv. It's Friday evening, and the streets are almost...
Now this person, Heather, is a Voice of America employee who is reporting in English for use in English and for versioning, I guess, in use by all the language services. So that's who we get at the start of this report, right?
Empty here in central Kyiv, but we can hear bombs in the distance. This is the second day of what has become known as the invasion of Ukraine.
Це Шегині, 30 кілометрів до пункту перетину кордону. Тут автівку зупиняють і далі у...
Self-explanatory, but just to be clear, here you have a Ukrainian language, Ukrainian service contributor to the program, and this has been incorporated into this piece.
Два варіанти. Або рухаєтесь в черзі, або кидаєте машину і йдете пішки.
Ukraine's western city of Lviv has become a major hub for Ukrainians fleeing Russia's mortars and missiles. Anna recorded these brief videos.
They just on these stairs and they are begging, please, we wanted to leave Kyiv, of course we don't know what to do.
It took them 2 days to reach the Polish border.
What is impacted is everyday life for almost everyone in this country at this time, where there is fear in every corner that there may be fresh attacks, fresh violence, and the scale of the destruction could be so great. Some people say it could be the greatest conflict since World War II.
Зараз ми ірпенських, які приїхали сюди сьогодні. Давайте другу коляску.
A surreal soundtrack greets the sea of humanity fleeing Ukraine.
And whose voice are we hearing here? Who is this?
That's Henry Ridgell from our correspondent in London. He covered refugee crisis, and he does more European reports, high level, but he went and helped us too.
Yeah, I think we get the point about this mixing and drawing together of the resources available across the breadth of VOA to produce truly unique reporting that gets shared and leveraged to become more. A quick question for you all, and then we want to open up to questions on the floor here. We have about 20 minutes left now, but it has to do with Voice of America telling America's story. And I always liked to describe that by saying in all of its richness and complexity. And anyone who's been living in the United States the last 5-10 years know that it's been a pretty rich and complex story. Can you briefly sum up some ways in which you tell America's story to the world and explain it? Maybe give an example just off the top of your head. Just a couple of minutes each. Don't overthink this. Who wants to start? Ayesha?
I'll start, and I'll connect to something that was said in the last panel, which is the world accepts America much more and likes it much more when America is not perfect. Because when you present America as perfect, then the world doesn't trust us. It sounds like propaganda, and they have grown up in countries where they have heard propaganda before, and they literally just block you. So we tell America's story, as you said, in all its richness, the good, the bad, the ugly, but we explain the processes. How does it work? How does a democracy work? It is not perfect, but people try. So, for example, we tell the stories of immigrants who came here and became successful. These are people who speak the language, are coming from the countries that our audience are based in, and they come here. They love the stories about, let's say, Kurdish or Pakistani or Afghans who came to America and how they made a living and the success that they achieved in this country. But then we also tell the story of Black Lives Matter and how there are sometimes problems, but then we also tell the story of how there are conversations around the problems. So in the last panel, we talked about training. The best training you can give your audience and journalists in various countries is by listening to you, and when they hear our leaders challenged on VOA platforms and hard and tough questions asked, that is a training on how democracy works. There is no better training than showing them sweeping things under the carpet is not a good idea. It's best to have things in public space and discuss them and talk about them. And that's how democracies flourish.
Well put. Who else wants to speak to this? Anybody?
Same thing that Ayesha said, just adding that like for countries like Iran, which is very close and then elections are almost always rigged and basically right? Covering US election, covering processes of the politics, the differences of opinions between different parties and the criticism of each of those opinions are something that we do, and we do it really well. And that's something, I guess, that it has shown, because like according to the last survey that USAGM had done, I want to be accurate. It says like 77% of our viewers in Iran confirmed that our programming increased their understanding of current events in the world, and 66% of our viewers increased the understanding of the US foreign policy, and 61% increased their understanding of American society. So I think this just sums it up.
Thanks. Chen?
Okay, in addition to what Ayesha and Leili said, American society, I also want to highlight one focus of our coverage, which is, we think, really important, is U.S.-China relations, but convey the complexity and the diversity and, how do I say, nuance of the U.S. discussion about China in the U.S. This is really important because I think in the recent years, the propaganda has been peddling a lot of conspiracy theories about, U.S. Suppression of China, bullying of China, and also because of the trade and the political, international, in so many different issues, the tension between the two countries. So there is a tendency in the Chinese propaganda to distort U.S. policy and intentions. So I think we put a lot of emphasis on, showing the complexity of U.S. discussions and U.S. policies. And these policies are not perfect, they are flawed, and they are controversial, and there are a lot of debates in the U.S., and we want to convey that kind of diversity and that kind of complexity of the U.S.-China policy. I think there is a huge demand in China, especially among the decision makers, the middle class, the educated, intellectuals. They want to understand U.S. correctly and accurately. I think we're playing a really important role. And also, but related to that, we're also, I think, doing a lot to curate and introduce the discussions in the whole American society about China. A lot of premier knowledge about China. We try to do that and share that with the Chinese audience. So that's a really important role that we're playing, and we're seeing a lot of interest in that. Thank you.
In example of Ukraine, it's a little bit different because Ukraine is very open to learn and want to see the examples of good democratic governance. And that's what we provide at VOA. The fact that we have a bureau in Washington and broadcasting from Washington, and we're using that access to the Hill, we're using that access to State Department, and actually showing many, let's say, discussions on the Hill. We are broadcasting live with simultaneous translation that actually get rebroadcast in Ukraine on many channels. So this is obviously that's what Ukrainians want to learn more about, and obviously U.S.-Ukraine relations specifically now. Every time crisis hit, the number of audience are doubled or tripled or quadrupled at, let's say, our audience in the country. So, and that's the fact of impact.
And I'm aware also, and particularly for the larger language services that have the resources to do it, that you in real time can convey important U.S. policy statements, which is what news people do. If there is a presidential address, if there is a hearing in Congress, or something else relevant to your particular area, you can pass it through with translation with no filter. They're seeing the raw American process in action live if they choose to do so.
We do simultaneous translations a lot of important events like the State of the Union. Almost every service in my division does a simultaneous translation, and if we are on the air at the time, like on our 24/7 channels, we show it live with a simultaneous translation. But these days, even if we're not on air, we do a Facebook Live and go live for the whole thing. So as you said, without filters, whatever it is, we show it, but in their own language.
Last point, then we'll go to questions, so get ready, folks.
Just a follow-up, anything on Iran that is happening in the United States, especially in Congress, all the debates, we also do simultaneously broadcast in State of the Union. It's normal for Voice of America. But just last year, we had almost 100 live broadcasts of U.S. issues in regarding to Iran and region simultaneously broadcast to Iran.
Bit of time for questions now. I can certainly carry on, but y'all must have questions for this incredible panel. Who has a question? Hand up, please. Yes, in the far corner up there. And down here. Run back and forth. It's okay. We have 3 lined up at the moment now. Please be sure to introduce yourself when you ask your question.
Andres Ilves from Radio for Europe, Radio Liberty, your sibling station. I'm curious, all of you, the 4 of you actually represent communities and languages that have substantial diasporas. Well, obviously all over the world, but in particular in the US, you all have very large communities that try to exert influence and get involved, and also perhaps can represent opposition in a way that would appear one way but may not reflect the nature of opposition inside the country. So I'm curious, I mean, this is obviously, we in fact talk about this sometimes as colleagues, but perhaps it'd be interesting for all of us to hear you talk about how you deal with diaspora communities and I mean, everything from their demonstrations to influence that they try to exert and you know, what you have to deal with, how they try to affect your coverage.
Thanks for that really easy question.
Right?
Who wants to take that on?
I mean...
The Iranians, okay.
Most powerful.
Yeah, Andres forgot to mention that he was my first boss as I was working. So I think in our case, as long as you do your job well, and as long as you stick to the facts, you're fine. We have complaints, that's true. We have diaspora trying to pressure us, but VOA stands strong in blocking all kind of influences in our programming. And so we listen, we review, and then we reply. And if they have a legitimate, basically grieving, we address that. If it's not legitimate, we address that. So it's pretty much being independent of all influence, and that's what we do.
Ayesha, hang on. I think we'll take Chen next, and we'll take you. Chen, go ahead.
Sure, I agree with Leili. I think, stick to the facts, and also, we're always mindful that we don't do advocacy journalism, we do journalism. So there are always different forces try to influence you, but I think the fact that our broadcasting, Mandarin content is both criticized as pro-China and anti-China, say something about, we're in the middle, because, there are obviously people think you're not critical enough of the Chinese government. And then there are sides that says you're always demonizing China. So I think the important thing is to stick to the facts and remember we're not advocating for any groups.
Yeah, and I don't mean to cast this or to have shifted his Andres' question into just a kind of a negative. There are so many positives to report about your communities in the United States. We're coming up this weekend on the Eastern Rite Easter celebration, and certainly the way the communities, the Slavic communities in the United States, the Ukrainians and others, celebrate that in their new homeland, or if they're in exile in the United States, it's a perfectly valid topic and the activities in favor of the country, demonstrations and activities, it's part and parcel,
We have
right?
just one challenge to make sure that we have both priests on air. But yes, we are covering diaspora extensively. There are a lot of Ukrainians, new wave of Ukrainian immigrants, the new established organizations who are working hard right now specifically to support people in the homeland. We tell the story about, it's widely, but one I just for example about the difference of opinion during, let's say, American election, it's very important to tell what diaspora think about both leading candidates, and that's what we were trying to do as well, and organizing discussions between pro, let's say back then, pro-Trump and pro-Hillary. There were two different groups, diaspora groups, so we were having them on air all the time. So this is we are trying to cover diaspora from every possible angle, and that's what the people in Ukraine need to know as well. So and we have a very, very big audience around the world, specifically because diaspora in other countries, Ukrainian diaspora in other countries, want to know more about diaspora.
I want to be sure to get these last two questions in, so
just
very, very brief.
Very quick follow-up on what you mentioned is during this past anti-government protests in Iran, right? Women, Life, Freedom. Iranian diasporas around the world have gathered together to show support of people inside Iran. Every Saturday in Washington, D.C. and all over the world, the protests are happening, 60 cities around the world, just to show support, and we're there to cover, and that's just a testament to what you just said.
Okay, let's go on. Sir. Please introduce yourself, Mr. Pomar.
I'm an old VOA veteran, Mark Pomar. I was at Voice of America in the 1980s, and I commend the panelists brilliantly explaining what we tried to do back in the 80s, and there's a continuity that is wonderful to realize, that what we tried to say, you've said very eloquently today. I would add only one sort of question. When I was called to explain VOA and what we were doing, I used certain words that I did not hear today, and I wonder how you'd react to them. One is values, that we were very, very conscious of saying, this is a battle of values. It's not just ideas, it's sort of the way moral, there was a moral issue to what we were. And when we would be challenged and said, you know, why don't you have more audience, and why don't you, and say, well, we put a moral issue ahead of impact. We put moral issue ahead of that. We cared to express that. And of course, when asked, what is the core of VOA, I would always answer human rights. At the end of the day, that was what we were about, human rights. I assume that resonates today, but I'd just love to know your thoughts on that as well.
Reactions? Ayesha, Myroslava, you were up first, and then Ayesha. Okay, no, go ahead.
I just say one word. I mean, probably human rights, that was the core issue back then in probably like 80s, 90s. I think generally democratic values are the core issue. It's not just the human rights. All the principle of democratic governance, that's the core, what we are trying to deliver or open to understanding to the world. So.
Ayesha.
No, I would just say that the reason probably you didn't hear us say it's because it's self-evident, right? The countries that we are covering, human rights are a big concern, and we cover human rights extensively, democratic values, etc. We cover a lot of authoritarian regimes, etc. So democratic values, freedom of press, human rights, accuracy, which a lot of emphasis on accuracy, because again, this is how you distinguish yourself from being a propaganda outlet and a news outlet that's trusted. And, you know, one example from my childhood, I grew up in Pakistan, was they didn't have any free television or radio stations. Every evening at 8 p.m. after dinner, my grandfather, and this went out in towns and villages around the country where people would turn on their radios and listen to, because at 8 p.m. BBC had a show in Urdu language. So after the government was done with telling people what happened all day, people would then turn to an international broadcaster to find out what really happened. So that's what we want to be, the source that people turn to find out what really happened.
One, two, three. Okay. Well, first off, thank you so much for the fantastic panel, Jeff, and thank all four of you for your incredible work. I think we're all so appreciative of it. My question, just to make it quick, is basically how do you support the morale of these journalists under your responsibility? Protection, safety is a separate issue, but obviously the issues that you're covering are these very traumatic, often depressing subjects. The Ukraine war, gross human rights violations. I know Ayesha mentioned explosions being regular. Obviously, you can do things like rotate journalists, which I think Myroslava mentioned. That's probably a key point. But I'm just kind of wondering if you could say more about this, and does it ultimately all predominantly just come down to the determination and will and the belief in the values of the journalists themselves?
I would just say that a lot of the journalists who work with us are happy to report on issues that in being neutral and in being accurate and in bringing this good journalism, they feel that they're helping their communities and their societies. And it gives them a sense of, being useful to their communities and their societies. So I think that we have, our journalists usually have a very high morale because they think that they're making a difference.
Just quickly, it's the matter of dedication. And the fact that in our cases, when things that are sad and disturbing happen, our journalists want to be there and they want to cover. I had during the anti-government protests in Iran, and like thousands of people have been imprisoned and they're facing executions. I had journalists who had left Voice of America calling me, asking me to come back as freelancers to be able to cover the extra shifts that we had. So as you mentioned, it's the dedication and the fact that you cannot ignore what is happening in these regions.
I also want to add one point that I think a lot of reporters who work for Voice of America, they call it the language services. They're native speakers who come from these countries. And a lot of them, I know myself included, that we witness the influence of Voice of America and the important significance it has. So I think a lot of people were actually inspired to work at Voice of America as native speakers from these countries. A lot of them have a very strong sense of mission. I think I have many colleagues like that, and they just truly feel like their work is important and they're making a difference. So I think that is something that is kind of different from a lot of other media. Yeah.
Myroslava?
Yeah, that's you summarized it, because I wanted to say that the core word here is a mission, because the fact that journalists they want to make change. They want to influence change, and that's what driven them, and it's all driven all of us, right? If we have a sense of mission, we would do our job the best we can. So yes, it doesn't mean that they don't need support, counseling, and that's what we're trying to do. But generally, our journalists are really mission-oriented people, and who just volunteer to do more than they even can chew. You have to stop them sometimes and tell them you cannot go there because this is dangerous. So.
It's very sobering that in the Cohen building, the headquarters of Voice of America, and also the agency USAGM, each day everybody walks by the portraits, the plaques commemorating, at the time I left the building, it was 13. I don't know what the number is now, Kate. Yeah, it's more. Journalists from U.S. International Broadcasting who've lost their lives in pursuit of their duties. So it's something that's with us all the time. And it discourages us, but it empowers, I'm still saying us, sorry. It empowers as well. That's a little bit of a downer note, but I think it is a fair way to
I mean, just to add to, yes, we have the colleagues who have fallen, but I cannot think of one instance where we've lost a journalist and that area has remained vacant for long. Somebody's always willing to step in. And that goes to the sense of mission.
As I prepared for this panel, I had a little bit of a kind of a Charlie's Angels fantasy going about what was going to go on here. And I have to say that in reality, it works out very much. I feel as though you've just had an hour and a half with 4 Gladys Knights and a pip. Let's hear it for this terrific panel and for VOA.
Thank you.